everyone, I am Tacet, and today we're going to be reading Chapter 3 of the Gems of War Lorekeeper series. Last week, Mira ended up getting a message from Medea's Tacet that read, "To the dragon that will be." And after that, she ended up getting mugged in Leona's Empire, and then she set out on her adventure towards the east. And that's pretty much everything relevant that happened. She got the message, she got mugged, and then she just went on her ride. And that's basically it. So let's get into Chapter 3 now. The Three Dragons, Chapter 3, Dragon's Eye View. The gods created daemons to test us and teach us. The more we fear something, the more we run from it. The more we run from something, the stronger it becomes. And the stronger it becomes, the more we fear it. Saint Astra of Whitehelm. Demistroxia, the red dragon, sat hunched up on the red rocky peak, thick red mist swirling about her clawed feet. It would have been both dramatically and aesthetically pleasing, these various shades of red, if her mood hadn't been equally as red, hot, and angry. She arched her back and stretched in a cat-like fashion. Well, to be more precise, if she thought about it, things were the other way around. Dragons weren't cat-like, cats were dragon-like. It would make sense if cats were the direct descendants of dragons after all. Felines have a whimsical temperament, a love for shiny objects, and an innate desire to knock things off flat surfaces, clearly linking them to some form of draconic ancestry. Enough about cats, though. Cats made her happy. Today, she felt like being angry. As Demistroxia stretched, she listened to her old bones crack, and the sound rumbled around the mountaintops like distant thunder. Demistroxia sighed. It really didn't sound like distant thunder, did it? Once upon a time, maybe. These days, it sounded more like a stone giant passing gas. She wasn't as young as she used to be. She was mad about that too. The fact was, dragons weren't immortal. Oh, most of the so-called mortal races thought dragons were. And, honestly, when you live 10 to 20 times as long as another creature, in their eyes, you may as well be immortal. But Demistroxia wasn't looking through their eyes. She was looking through her own, and most days now, that vision started to get a little cloudy. Once, when she was younger, she could have spotted a field mouse 5 leagues away on a dark night. But now she was lucky if she could tell a goblin from a gerbil without tasting it first. Failing vision, something else to make her mad at. Mostly though, at this very moment, she was mad at what she could just make out far below her. Creatures were marching through a rocky pass in the mountains, and not just any creatures, daemons. Cats made her happy, daemons most definitely did not. The daemons first arrived many centuries ago. It was a time known as the Blight. Demistroxia had heard there was a portal deep within their lands through which they emerged, but she had never seen it. She wanted to see it though. She wanted to burn it to charcoal, then burn the charcoal to ashes, and then, well, she wasn't too sure she could burn the ashes to anything, but she sure was willing to give it a red roasting and try her luck. Demistroxia and her mate, Venberic, had led the dragons in a fierce resistance back then. They had won so many battles, but in the end, there were just too many foes to handle, and daemons had gained a foothold in the rocky kingdom known simply as the Blighted Lands. Defeat would have been bad enough, but her mate, Venberic, had been lost, taken and twisted by infernal Daemon King. Most days now, she sat atop this perch, hoping to catch a glimpse of Venberic's fine black scales. But even when she thought she did, she was no longer sure it was actually Venberic or some other dark flying creature. Not that he'd remember her anyway, with his mind all twisted by the Inferno King's chaotic magics. Demistroxia felt a sadness inside, and she pushed it down with a big boiling lump of cat-free rage. How dare these creatures march so brazenly right below her? Slowly, she focused her gaze upon the leader. She recognized him. He was one of the Inferno King's generals, Mordennes. Dragons may not be immortal, but it seemed Damon's were. Mordain looked stronger than the day she first faced him, all those years ago. His red skin and golden armor glistening in the fiery light from his horse's mane. It was just as she remembered. Mordain still rode a terrifying creature known as Nightmare. Demostraxia squinted. It was definitely Mordain. He was riding at the head of a column of bone daemons, hell beasts, and lesser creatures. There, strapped on his fiery mount, was a weapon she'd seen before, a large burning scythe known as Deathspire. It meant the daemons were marching to war. Her first impulse was to leap into the air and rake a pillar of flame over their entire column. Trapped in the pass, they'd be burned with nowhere to run. She was older now, though, slower, yet wiser. Mordain was a formidable foe. She'd not survive a direct assault against them. For now, she'd watch and learn what they were up to. Maybe she could also think about cats and try to keep her temper in check. For most of the day, Demostraxia flew from peak to peak, staying hidden from the army below her. The path they took through the mountains snaked back and forth, sometimes steep, sometimes rocky. No human, elf, or dwarf could have managed it. Well, maybe a dwarf. They were rough and determined little creatures, if slightly on the deranged side. Eventually, as night fell, the army made its way down towards a small cove on the coast. It was growing dark, so Demostraxia couldn't make out what was down there, but she could see faint torchlight. Whatever it was new. Her eyes might be as sharp as a rusty spoon, but her mind was still working perfectly. She knew every inch of these mountains, and there had been no settlement, daemon or otherwise, in that cove. What were her options? She could fly over and take a quick look, but demon eyes would be better than her own in the dark. She'd likely be spotted before she could learn anything, and once she was spotted, she was in danger. She might also fly into a tree. Flying at night was tricky, even when your eyes worked fine. She could fly straight down and try to surprise them, but she hadn't lived to a ripe old age by taking chances like that. Until she knew what was down there, she'd be keeping her distance. That left her one final option, sitting on a mountain all night, trying to grab a few hours of sleep, and waiting for morning. She missed her nice warm cave. Sleeping on mountains meant she'd wake up with rock-shaped divots in her belly. Demostraxia sighed, then settled down to find the least uncomfortable pieces of granite to sleep on. She managed it, but her dreams were grim and full of dark things. The sunrise found Demostraxia already awake and squinting down at the cove. She could make out ships, lots of ships. Had the daemons been building a fleet? And to what ends? The Isle of Darkstone was nearby. From what she remembered of it, demonic corruption was already taking hold there. The only other place nearby was a small island lookout where a group of knights kept watch for any sign of trouble. That must be it. They were going to see some trouble today if she couldn't do something about it. Then her breath caught in her throat. There was something else down in the cove. She could make out the dark forms of dragons. They looked like they were chained on the water's edge, wings splayed out in an unnatural fashion. Was one of them Vinberic? She couldn't tell from here. She felt an uncomfortable rage and leapt into the air, unfurling her wings. That proved to be a mistake, as her wings didn't unfurl quite the way she used to, and certainly not after a long cold night sleeping on a bed of jagged granite. The beginnings of a terrifying roar were cut short as she lost her balance, tilted to one side, crashed into part of the mountain, dislodging a rock, then half flew about 200 spans to a small ledge where she managed to frantically catch hold. If cats had indeed descended from dragons, then always landing on their feet was something they picked up along the way. The dislodged rock, meanwhile, gathered a few enthusiastic followers and bounced down towards the Daemon army, announcing Demostraxia's presence with all the grace of a dwarf in a dancing contest as it smashed into a bone daemon, sending splinters flying. It felt as if 1,000 sets of eyes turned towards her. In actual fact, it may have been more. Demostraxia wasn't counting at this point. Slowly, she scrambled up onto the ledge and regained her feet. She was proud, though. She felt a sharp pain in her left side, but she still drew herself up as regally as she could. Down below, a red and gold figure was striding through the troops. Demostraxia! Really? Is that you? Mordain yelled up at her, still perched 500 spans above him in the early morning light. There was laughter in his voice. You've grown old, dragon. I didn't come here to talk, Mordain. You didn't come here to do acrobatics either, and yet here you are, entertaining us. The daemon juggled. It was a horrible, deep, rasping sound. Demostraxia wasn't in the mood for small talk. There was a red-hot anger burning behind her eyes. She leapt again, and this time her wings caught air beneath them. It hurt, but she swooped down towards the daemons. She could vaguely see creatures scattering as she went. Mordain was there somewhere, but in the chaos, she could no longer pick him out. She held her fire, though. She had a plan. Unlike his troops, Mordain stood his ground. As the dragon passed overhead, he heaved his sword at its underside, and was rewarded with a dull thud as it struck flesh. Demostraxia felt a new pain explode through her chest, and realized she'd been hit. She was focused now, though. And although the pain was bad, she'd felt worse. She landed near the dragons on the beach. Sure enough, they were corrupted fell dragons, like her Venberic. Her mate was not here, though. She couldn't risk freeing them, so she leapt into the air again and flew towards the ships, moored in the cove. She began to draw in air, ready to breathe. She felt the familiar tingling sensation of fire igniting in the back of her throat. The exquisite pain and pleasure of it all rolled into one. As she reached the ships, she let loose a giant cone of dragonfire. It blossomed down over the wooden demonic barges, blackening their timbers and warping their masts. 1/3 of the ships were engulfed before she drew breath again. But Demostraxia felt the fire fading. She was wounded, and she knew she had very little left, and veered north and flew away from the cove, leaving the blighted lands and the daemon's army behind. Demostraxia flew until her energy was gone, and the rage along with it. Mordain would follow her if he could. His nightmare was tireless, but it would take him most of a day to do so. She didn't feel safe flying too high, so she found a secluded spot on the coast with some tufts of soft brown grass and landed there. It wasn't a graceful landing, but there was nobody around to see it. Demostraxia wouldn't have cared if there was. All she wanted to do was rest. She looked down at her chest. A red-bladed crystal sword still protruded from it. She gathered her courage and reached down and plucked it from out with her teeth. Then she breathed a little fire on the wound to seal it. Dragons never mentioned it, but they had few vital organs on their underside. That didn't mean getting stabbed there hurt any less, but if your enemies were focusing there, you had a better than even chance of getting away. That done, she felt sleep begin to wash over her. Eep! A tiny voice yelled in her ear. It must have been a dream. Eep! It yelled louder this time. Demonstraxia opened her eyes and was staring at a tiny daemon hovering before her. She breathed her last fire right into the creature's face, turning it to ash and cinders. All that remained was a small scrap of parchment. Curious, she snaked her head down to look at it. There had been writing on it, but all she could make out was, "Meet me at Broken Spire, 2 weeks." She sighed and closed her eyes again. The letter was tomorrow's problem. Right now, she needed to sleep. This time, she dreamed of cats. Far to the west, on a different continent entirely, Amira had been trudging through the desert for 3 days, heading east from Leothasa. There had been no sign of Emperor Corvash, no sign of anything really, except an enterprising little scorpion that had cleverly gotten into her boot, then immediately regretted it when she'd squashed him. As she set up camp for the night, she noticed a strange lights in the sky to the north, far over Marjar's spine. She shrugged. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was just a distraction. Either way, it was more than she'd found here. She resolved to head north in the morning, maybe cross the mountains and investigate. Then she stretched out under the stars and fell promptly asleep. And that is it. That was the longest Lorekeeper to date so far, and as she just hinted, that is the new kingdom that's coming out this Friday. Also, I found it really adorable that they made mention basically of the cat dragon. That's going to be coming in, I believe, early September, September 7th. I forget the exact date off the top of my head right now. But yeah, we're getting the cat dragon pet soon. For any of you that don't know, that was the community voted pet on the forum and social media, and cat dragon ends up winning, and they made a cute, adorable cosmetic cat dragon, so we'll be getting that pretty soon. Actually, today, if you're watching this on the day that I'm releasing it, we're actually getting that cute little doggy for International Dog Day, which I believe is this weekend. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. We'll be back next week with Chapter 4. Goodbye, everyone!